Welcome to Radio 64. Welcome to Radio 64, Video Game Music Remix Radio. I'm your host, Eric Mickles, also known online as duskvstweak. Radio 64 is part of the Radio Meanwhile network. Visit radiomeanwhile.com for more information about this and other great podcasts. Share your thoughts on this episode and request music by following the show on Facebook or Twitter at Radio64Pod. Please rate, subscribe, and share this show on Apple, Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. We opened the show with Sacred Flute by Blue.Nocturne from ocremix.org from the game The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, the Super NES classic. That was remixing Flute Boy's Ocarina by Koji Kondo. I was always really interested in the whole Flute Boy saga and Link to the Past when I was younger. That boy that you'd see sometimes, if you got too close, he'd disappear. He'd be surrounded by animals while he plays his flute, but he'd disappear. And then he'd be turned into a tree in the dark world. And it was always this really bizarre, fantastical thing that was happening off to the side in Link to the Past. Something that maybe you didn't even have to fit. I mean, if you got the flute, you'd be able to fast travel throughout the world, but it felt like something you could miss or didn't have to complete all the way through because you have to dig for it too. It was such a strange element of that game. Yeah, as a kid, it just fascinated me, this story and the dad being like, where's my son? I love that peaceful opening 30 seconds of that track we just played. It really does feel like just a walk through the woods. And then it picks up and it becomes this very happy woodwinds piece, very joyful and adventurous take. So again, that was Sacred Flute by Blue.Nocturne from ocremix.org from the game Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Next, we have a fairly new release. This comes from the Golden Sun: A World Reignited tribute album to Golden Sun and Golden Sun: The Lost Age. And it's important to note that it also includes The Lost Age because that's where this track comes from. It's remixing the Jupiter Lighthouse, which apparently is a pretty big, intricate dungeon in the Golden Sun: Lost Age game back on the Game Boy Advance. I never played Golden Sun: The Lost Age. As much as I liked the first game, I never got the sequel. Game Boy Advance was the last portable system I owned, and even then I think I was starting to fall off the wagon of portable gaming. So while I really liked Golden Sun, by the time Lost Age came out, I was strictly on my PS2. So I probably missed out. This is a groovy, industrial, glitchy piece, like some kind of dark lit club out of the Matrix. Even reminds me a bit of some remixes I've heard of the Team Rocket themes, the original Pokemon Red and Blue. This is The Dance of the Anemos by Glejs from the album Golden Sun: A World Reignited from the game Golden Sun. That was The Dance of Anemos by Glejs from the album Golden Sun, A World Reignited, from the game Golden Sun, The Lost Age. Yeah, listening to that whole thing, I do get a Pokemon vibe. Maybe that's just because I've listened to so much more Pokemon music. Alright, this track makes me happy because I don't think Final Fantasy VIII gets enough remix love. This is a combination of both of Nobuo Uematsu's tracks, One Winged Angel from Final Fantasy VII and Liberi Fatali from Final Fantasy VIII. Even though on Overclocked Remix it's labeled under Final Fantasy VII, to me this is a Final Fantasy VIII remix. And I think, again, it's just because I want more FF8 tracks. I want a Final Fantasy VIII tribute album to be released. So I hear this and I'm like, nope, it's a Final Fantasy VIII track. But it really honors both of them very well. And both Liberi Fatali and One Winged Angel do meld into each other. It helps, I think, that the vocals of both tracks are removed. And so you're able to just get the main riffs from One Winged Angel and Liberi Fatali and just kind of mesh them up a little bit without having the Sephiroth or that choir from Final Fantasy VIII's track. And one thing I really find impressive about this track is that it builds and it becomes this big orchestral bombastic piece, but for the last minute it just winds down. It doesn't end big. The last minute it's winding down with those repeating riffs from both those tracks, and it ends on a quiet note, and I think I really appreciate that, because it could, with those two tracks, it could just keep getting bigger and louder, and it goes in a different direction. So this is Duel of the Blades by Kevin Penkin from ocremix.org from the game Final Fantasy VII and VIII. That was Duel of the Blades by Kevin Penkin from ocremix.org from the game Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VIII. Up next, we have this really raw hip-hop instrumental piece that has a lot of sound sampling. It's coming from the 1984 game Kung Fu back on the original Nintendo system, which had Koji Kondo doing the soundtrack to it. But this remix comes from 2002, fairly early on in Overclocked Remix's life. I had to go looking to see a playthrough of Kung Fu to see what it was about. It's just this side-scrolling fighting game. Looks like a really primitive version of like Double Dragon and Streets of Rage, but the music isn't that far from this remix. This remix isn't really doing crazy things with that original source. It's filtering it a bit and it's bringing in all those sound effects, but making that bass line heavier while keeping everything still very raw. It creates this really kickin' piece. Cool, peeled back hip hop track. So this is Sound Test by badlsdtrip from ocremix.org from the game Kung Fu. That was Sound Test by badlsdtrip from ocremix.org from the game Kung Fu. I got a couple more pieces that are very early on in Overclocked Remix's life. This one's from 2000. It's from GoldenEye 007. It's a collaboration between Mustin and Scott Peeples. As someone who enjoyed Scott Peeples' work on Overclocked, I definitely hear his influence. But that's Mustin coming in with that saxophone. And I've said before, I love a good saxophone on these remixes. This is a really laid-back, jazzy piece from GoldenEye 007 back on the Nintendo 64. Minimal, it's got that main control beat from GoldenEye, and a saxophone and the piano are just kind of going back and forth, playing very minimalistically, not really going for these crazy solos, just showing up here and there throughout this. It's a very, I think it's a very cool track. I remember when I was listening to this as a teenager, it always kind of made me think of maybe James Bond is seeing everything burn and explode, but everything in his mind is very relaxed. This is how cool and collected Bond is as everything else is going crazy. So this is Controlled Jazz by Mustin and Scott Peeples. ocremix.org from the game GoldenEye 007. was Control Jazz by Mustin and Scott Peeples from ocremix.org from the game GoldenEye 007. Up next, again, an old track from 2000. It's called Mute Radiology by djpretzel. This is remixing Mute City from F-Zero, and if you're not wearing headphones, you definitely should for this track, because a lot of this is very early glitching effects, but djpretzel is playing a lot with panning throughout this. You'll be hearing a track in one ear, and then it's coming into the next ear, and then it's kind of just playing in between your skull, and it's just bouncing around while having this really strange and unique crunchy electronic sound. The main theme, the main Mute City theme, is almost kind of being blasted out forward while everything else is just going back and forth. It creates this very sci-fi tone that I think matches F-Zero very well. This is Mute Radiology by djpretzel from ocremix.org from the game F-Zero. That was Mute Radiology by djpretzel from ocremix.org from the game F-Zero, also on the Super Nintendo. We got a couple more Super Nintendo tracks coming up, but back to the NES. Kind of a Nintendo-themed episode. But this track is from Super Mario Bros. 2. It's the underground background music. And while I like how happy the main Mario Bros. 2 track is, it's the underground background music that is just so cool and exotic when you listen to, when you're playing Super Mario Bros. 2, that it still has kind of that foreboding sound that the original Mario Brothers game had when you were underground, but the second game had a little bit more of an adventurous side to it, even though it also still had this foreboding, you don't want to be underground tune. But also, Underground is where you'd run into that mask that would just fly around and chase you from screen to screen. You could... that was just so spooky. And you'd be digging forever under the sand. It always felt like being underground was much more dangerous. This is Melancholy Dreams by Vurez from ocremix.org from the game Super Mario Bros. 2. Was Melancholy Dreams by Vurez from ocremix.org from the game Super Mario Bros. 2. A game that, as I've gotten older, I've appreciated the soundtrack more and more. It's Koji Kondo again, but I know the whole Doki Doki Panic, it was supposed to be that game. They just reskinned it as Mario thing, but I wonder if the sound... I've never looked up to see if the soundtrack was also changed, reskinned to Mario, or if this is the original soundtrack that it had. I should have done that research, but I didn't. Chrono Trigger up next, the 1995 Super Nintendo game. This one's got vocals, and it's remixing the Robo's theme, and that's very important because Robo is the one singing this entire song. It's just the story about Robo, his origin, how happy he is to be part of this team, this party, all the things he can do for your group. He can be left alone and plant this garden. He can help grow a forest. And the part that cracks me up is how he's always saying, "Won't you pick me instead of that frog? I can do healing too." I've always had a soft spot for Robo. I love Frog. I've talked about him in previous episodes, but Robo's got just such a friendly design. It's hard not to love Robo. And with this track, he's just so likable in these lyrics. He just wants to be liked. So this is The Incredible Singing Robot by Star Salzman, ocremix.org from the game Chrono Trigger. was The Incredible Singing Robot by Salzman from ocremix.org from the game Chrono Trigger. Yeah, I guess this is a bit of a Nintendo track. It was a Sega Dreamcast game first, but then Skies of Arcadia was also ported to the GameCube. Finding either copies for a reasonable price seems impossible. So the track I have is coming from the Arcadia Legends tribute album. And the track I've picked, I didn't even realize I had picked it this way, but it's a track from the 4th bonus album. So whereas the main first 3 discs are remixing each track from the game kind of chronologically as you play the game, these are a collection of songs that are just in addition to all of it, though some of them are repeats. So this is remixing Ramirez's theme from Arcadia Legends. I like it because it's a heavy, dark piece that is very foreboding and very atmospheric for a long time. And then near the end, it starts picking up and it becomes kind of like a boss battle. So this is Ramirez's theme by Nokbient from the album Arcadia Legends from the game Skies of Arcadia. That was Ramirez's theme by Nokbient from the album Arcadia Legends from the game Skies of Arcadia. Alright, an old favorite of mine is up next from Donkey Kong Country 2, our last Super Nintendo track of the episode. It's called KRool Intentions, or KRool Intentions. It's remixing a whole bunch of tracks from Donkey Kong Country 2 in this big medley. And what I like about it is doing this, it feels like an orchestral piece if the orchestra was made of industrial rockers. KRool Intentions by Protricity from ocremix.org from the game Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Kong Quest. That was KRool Intentions by Protricity from ocremix.org from the game Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Conquest. That is the last track of the episode, so thank you for listening to Radio 64 Video Game Music Remix Radio. Radio 64 is part of the Radio Meanwhile network. Visit radiomeanwhile.com for more information about this and other great podcasts. I have been your host, Eric Mickles, also known online as duskvstweak, and you can find me on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube under duskvstweak. Please share your thoughts on this episode and request music by following the show on Facebook or Twitter at Radio64Pod. Please rate, subscribe, and share the show on Apple, Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.